Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Stories for Hope podcast. I'm your host, Nicole, and I just want to start off by saying thank you for joining us. This is our very first podcast, and we are excited to get the opportunity to share some amazing stories with you. First, I'd like to explain a bit about who we are and what we're about. Stories for Hope is a podcast run by Hope for Kids International. We are a nonprofit that has been restoring hope around the world. We are committed to serving children living in impoverished environments by establishing economic, spiritual, water, educational, and feeding programs. In addition to these programs, we have been leading teams of volunteers on short-term mission trips. Our vision is healing and empowering communities to break the cycle of poverty. The number 4 in Hope for Kids International stands for our 4 pillars of hope, which are health, dignity, joy, and love. This year is actually our 50th anniversary. It all began with our founder and president, Tom Egham, as he was smuggling Bibles into the Soviet Union in the 70s. To celebrate these 50 years of ministry, we want to share some amazing stories of hope and inspire you to bring hope to those in need. In today's episode, Tom's going to share about that first trip that he had into the Soviet Union and the family he met who inspired him to find hope in any circumstance. Let's hear from Tom.
1971, I made my first trip into the Soviet Union and was trained under Brother Andrew, his organization in Holland, who was the author of the God Smuggler. And I loved the stories because he'd say he'd drive up to the border in his Volkswagen and have Bibles in the back seat, and the guards would look in and he'd pray, Lord, when you saw blind people, you made them see. Now when you see seeing guards, make them blind. So we literally did that. I had a friend of mine, we bought a hippie van, a Volkswagen, van, bus thing, We bought it in Holland and then drove all over Scandinavia and then into the Soviet Union through Finland. And that's exactly what we did. We had Bibles, and we prayed that the border guards would not find them. And the first trip, I think we only took 10 Russian Bibles, and we had them stuck down in our pants. And then we had literature and stuff in our suitcases and stuff. But when we came to the border, they made us get out. And so we're out, and they said, empty everything out of your van. So can you imagine? We got Bibles stuck in the pants, we're moving things, out. And then they came to us, and they started searching the vehicle. And they actually ran wires up into the ceiling to see if we'd concealed anything in the ceiling. They took the side panels, but they were kind of cardboardish, on the doors. Took them and looked down in there. They even put some kind of a scope down in the gas tank to see. And then if there was anything in the gas tank. And then there was a pit underneath. They'd search the bottom. Well, we saw them ahead of us searching. Then they put the people up against their car and do the pat. And, that was, I'd like to say I was like all fired up and thinking, but I'm sure my voice was a few octaves higher than it is now. But anyway, what was amazing was when it came to that, they never opened our suitcases and they'd never hand patted us. And they handed our visas back, our passports, and said, on your way. And I'm telling you, my friend Brad and I, when we were driving, we didn't say a word. Because you're thinking, what just happened? That was not anything on my, that I tricked them or anything like that. It was there for them. And I really felt like God answered our prayer. So that was our first border crossing. There are many, many border crossing stories over the years. But what impacted me, again, like I said earlier about, I went for the danger and the thrill, but then you meet the people and your heart just says, I want to do whatever I can. And we visited a Baptist church in Moscow, and most churches Stalin had literally closed thousands of churches in Leningrad and in Moscow. And there was 2 Baptist churches left, and one was quite famous. And part of it was they left that open because their constitution guaranteed the freedom of religion. And then we went there, and we were ushered in. We sat up in the balcony, and while I was sitting up there, I noticed a young girl. She ended up to be 14 years old, and her father looking in the door from outside and looking up at us. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And then afterward, we were outside, and people are, milling around and stuff. Nobody talked to us, but the girl came up and said, um, I must speak with you, but I cannot talk here. Meet me down and to the left. So I got a hold of Brad a little later, and I said, let's go. And so we started walking down the direction we'd seen her go, and it ended up that these were believers, the young girl and her father. And when we got to a park quite a ways away, we stopped and talked, and they said, "Are you believers?" And we said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, we need to visit with you. Do you have bread?" And bread is the bread of life. That's scripture. And I said, "Yes, but how do you know?" Again, we'd been trained. The KGB can do this. They can act like a believer and, arrest you or whatever. So I was very skeptical. And I said, "Well, how do you know we're Americans?" And she said, she said, "Last night my papa was praying and God told him American boys will bring bread." And I said, "Well, how do you know we're Americans?" We had to cut our hair really short, like Europeans were at that time, wore these European suits that we'd actually brought in for believers. So we thought we were like incognito, And so she said, "Well, at first we thought you're from the Ukraine." But then she said, "The Spirit of Christ in me bore witness, the Spirit of Christ in you, and we knew you were the two." Well, I'm like, up to that point, I thought, here I am, this like hero smuggling Bibles, and I'm going to help these poor people. And that was the instant that I thought, whoa, what is this? Well, the border also, but I mean, what is this? And she said, "We cannot talk here. You follow us on a tram." And we followed them on a tram, and then they brought us to their home. They had to be they said, "Walk behind us, make some distance," all that, and got in their place. And then they just opened up and said, "We're so glad you're here." They started serving us, I'll never forget, tea and beet jam. First time I'd had beet jam. But anyway, that started the relationship of hearing a story of this young girl who refused to join the Pioneers, which is the Young Communist Party, which you still see in communist countries around the world today. And you wear a uniform, to school, and she didn't have the uniform. Her teacher mocked her, made her stand up front, said, "Why aren't you in the Pioneers?" And she said, "It's because I believe in Jesus." And they mocked her and all that. And she said her teacher even slapped her in the face and said, "Deny Jesus." And she said, "I wouldn't." And then her father was a professor at the University of Moscow, and his study was all about Lenin. That was kind of his expertise, and taught Leninism, and he became a believer. And so he lost his job at the university, which was common, and she was removed from school, and then her little brother was taken away and to be educated properly. And that was common. This was not an unusual story. And they were just talking about the heartbreak of losing the little boy. Again, it was so long ago, I don't remember exactly how old he was, but 4 or 5 years old, something like that. And she said one day, almost a year later, they contacted them and said, you can receive your brother back. And they went to, I think it was like a Hall of Justice or something like that. And they went there and they saw an official with a young boy on the steps. And she said, "I ran to hug and kiss him, but right when I arrived, they took him away." She said, "I'm not sure if it was my brother or not." But then they tried to use that and say, "Okay, if you want, then you sign these papers, you deny, you do this, all that." And so the heartbreak that they shared, but the joy. This girl, Natasha, had this musical ability. She actually, it was kind of surprising. Here's this tiny little Russian girl, and she's got a guitar, and her father was educated in music also, and he's like coaching her to sing, and out comes this operatic voice, and you're like, whoa. And it was all songs she wrote. And just one other little story with them. Later, the next day or 2 days later, or something like that, we met in the rural part of town, and then went into the forest, and they felt more free there to praise and sing and stuff. And while we were there, she started singing the song Hallelujah to the Edelweiss tune. And that really hit me, because I thought, it was a song we sang in the Jesus movement in California, and it was popular at that time. And here in the forest in the Soviet Union, and I realized we're one. The Spirit has taught them, a song that we sing all over the world. It was so moving that I just felt like this bond. And I'd say that was, another one of those things that just solidified that this was not going to be my only trip, that I was going to continue to be involved. I was going to try to help hearing believers in prison, believers put in psych wards, just those kinds of stories, personalized it. So it was a life changer. 1971.
Wow. Thank you, Tom. The family in this story is an inspiration for all of us, and a reminder that God is always with us, even in the hardest times. Can you imagine losing your job, your education, and losing a family member, having a family member kidnapped, essentially, all because you chose to believe in God? And despite all of these things, all these hardships that this family went through, we learned that the family continues to have hope in God and His bread of life, His word. It's just truly, truly amazing, and such a wonderful story to kick off this podcast. I don't know about you, but I am so inspired to continue to find the hope that is in God and in our relationship with Him and in His word. And I pray that you are as well. Thank you for joining me today. If this inspired you to want to learn more about how you can bring hope to others, potentially through some of our programs such as sponsorship, clean water, education, or legacy gift, you can get connected with us at H4KI.org. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time. Have a blessed day.